Hello, everyone. I'm Chase. Welcome to the Open Planetary Lunch for September the 1st, 2020. I have lunch. Our speaker today is Alice Allen from the Astrophysics Source Code Library, who's already sharing her screen. So when you're ready, just start. Thanks for being here.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Chase, for having me here. And let me see how, oh, there we go. So as Chase said, I'm from the Astrophysics Source Code Library. I'm the editor-in-chief, which kind of amuses me, but I've been the editor for the past 10 years. And my academic background is actually in biology, particularly microbiology and hematology, immunology, that kind of stuff, viruses. But my professional career was spent in IT, in information technology. And, but I come from a household from a family that was very into the space program. I had a telescope when I was a kid. My dad worked for NASA at Goddard, and we were all very enthusiastic about looking up into the sky and seeing what we could see. So I've been editor, as I said, for the past 10 years, and a lot of the ASCL has changed a lot in that time. So what I'm going to cover today is what the ASCL is, what it does, why it exists, what you get out of registering your software, and also what we're trying to do with planetary science. We're focused a little bit more on this than we used to be. I'll do a little demo and maybe share a few secrets with you, and I'm happy to take questions throughout. I do not have the chat up on my screen right now, so if you have a question, you can, I hope somebody has chat open, maybe Chase does, but I'm also willing to take them if you just stop me and say, hey, I have a question. Interrupting me is fine. So let's talk about what the ASCL is. It is a registry of codes used in refereed research. That's why we exist. We want to reveal some of the methods of research that sometimes don't get revealed. We can serve as a repository, and when the ASCL started in 1999, it was only a repository. You had to deposit your code in order to be in order to have an ASCL entry. When I took over in 2010, one of the things I did was look to see what was inhibiting the growth of the ASCL. And one of those things was requiring code deposit. People simply did not want to deposit their code someplace else. They felt they wanted to keep it close to them. It was kind of painful to put it someplace else, especially someplace they didn't really know much about the ASCL and they weren't sure what the ASCL was about. So we can still serve as a repository, but generally we now point to where the software exists, where the software lives, so people can download it. We do serve as a repository for the codes that we gathered before 2010, and also for new codes that people don't want to maintain a presence for themselves. So if you write a code and you never want to touch it again, we're happy to take it, assign it a DOI, and serve it to the public. But we don't serve code to the public unless we have permission to from the software author. We're indexed by ADS and other indexers, so information about software flows from us to other entities. The driving reason for why we register software is transparency. We want to make the research record more robust and make the codes that are used in research more easily found. So that's why we do this. We register codes used in refereed research. We have two main criteria. So for code being an ASCL, it has to be used in refereed research. And the artifacts that we use to demonstrate that it's used in research is refereed articles, articles that have been submitted for refereeing, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment, and then those that are accepted for PhD theses. The acceptance rate for papers in astronomy and in astrophysics, this discipline is very high. So if an article is submitted for refereeing, it's probably going to get published. Something like 92% of papers eventually end up being published. Maybe not in their first choice journals, but they do get published. So we go ahead and accept software that's only in an article that's been submitted for refereeing because of that high acceptance rate. If we were doing this in economics, we would not be doing that. So, because the acceptance rate in economics is so much lower, it's in the 30 percentile range. So for astrophysics, it's pretty safe to do that. So the first criteria is it has to be used in research, and we have to have something demonstrating that it is used in research. And the other criteria is that the software has to be available for download. We want the source code. We want the source code, not just a black box. So we don't accept binaries. We don't accept just web services unless we also have the source code behind them. It's okay if you serve binaries, if you offer binaries to the public, but what we want to see is source code, because that is the human readable form of this technology, of this method, and should be available to people. So we go out and look for software, and when we find it in articles, in these different resources, we write up entries and publish these online. But we really like it when when the software authors register their own software for a couple of different reasons. First of all, we're not going to find every software package out there. There's just too much software. So we do what we can. There are 3 editors now, and we all look at papers, 3 editors, and then somebody who feeds me codes regularly. So there are 4 of us out there looking for software, but we don't find all of it. So we like it when software authors create the entries themselves. And what you get out of registering your software is a unique identifier for your software, the ASCL ID, which we assign to all of the code that we accept. You get information about your code going out to ADS and Google Scholar and these other entities. You get a trackable citation method. And what that means is that your code can be cited using ASCL ID. Every journal out there in this discipline, and also the journals such as Science and Nature, accept citation by ASCL ID, and that method is trackable. So ADS will count your citations because they know to look through the reference list for ASCL citations and track them. This isn't the only way to cite software. This is a way to cite software, but you can use the ASCL that way. And this increases the discoverability of your software, so more people know about it. So we want to improve code release because code release improves research. Research depends on transparency and reproducibility. That's the integrity of research requires this. And research depends on software. Carol Goebel has said that software is the most used instrument in science. And that's certainly true in astronomy, astrophysics, and planetary science. You cannot do research without software. The software is important in research not only because it's a method and should be revealed, but also because it generates results, enables scientific discovery, and it's part of the research record, or should be part of the research record. So we want to preserve software, we want to make it discoverable, and we want people to be able to reuse it to examine it. But to put this in a larger context, software also demonstrates how common and uncommon problems are solved in our field. And programming is a creative endeavor, and a software package is the result of that creativity. And this is part of the culture of the discipline. It's not just because it's a nice, it's a nice package, you can do this research with it, but it also reveals something about the culture of the discipline at this point in time. And we may not know really what it is that it reveals until later when others are looking at this time in the discipline. So we firmly believe that releasing software improves the transparency of the research, and more transparent science is simply better science. Releasing software hasn't always been rewarded, however, and that's something that the ASCL has been trying to help with. When I started working on on the resource in 2010, I was very interested in getting the ASCL to be citable, because then there was a reward for putting your code in ASCL and using it for citation, because then you could accrue academic credit in a way that makes sense in academia. Having citations is important. And I also started working with journal editors to make sure that citations to ASCL entries were acceptable in their references, and pushing on them to accept it. Because at that time, when I started working on this, there were journals that would not allow software citation. They said, nope, don't cite software, just put it in a footnote. It's like, that's not giving people credit. So so now all journals accept citation, all of the ones for this field. ASCL has been cited in ASCL entries have been cited in over 100 journals, and they're all happy now to take these.
Michael I asks in chat how your citations differ from using DOIs, and it sounds like the answer might be just the kind of institutional clout you're talking about that your organization has accrued.
Well, yeah, I would like to think that we have institutional clout. Thank you so much for that. I'm putting a red star on this day. People sometimes think DOIs are magic. We can assign DOIs to software, and we do only for the software artifact that we hold. We don't assign them to our entries themselves. A DOI is a social contract, and that social contract can break down. If the ASCL were to go offline, the DOIs that we've issued do nothing unless somebody takes over the resource and redirects the DOIs to a new location. So we don't anticipate, we've been online since 1999 at the same location at ascl.net. So we don't anticipate going out of business. And I don't want to say DOIs are bad, they're certainly not. And I want people to get DOIs for their software, but we haven't done it for the same reason ADS doesn't have DOIs for its records. So ADS has asked me about getting DOIs for ASCL records. I said, well, when you do, we will. Because they don't either. So we see ourselves as an indexer of software, a registry of software, and because we don't actually hold most of the software that we register, we don't assign DOIs to our records themselves. Did that answer the question? I'm not sure it did.
I don't know, Michael. Michael says it's interesting and he was not aware of the issues. So I think, yes, partially.
Okay. All right.
Is there deduplication occurring because with the DOIs? Because like now with SpicyPy, like there is an entry on this repository, but I also have now a publication in JOS. But I'm not sure if either of them have been cited in an article yet. But I guess that's something that well, I guess you're the person to ask, right? It's like, how does like if I have a DOI and your system points to it, how does it deduplicate on the indexers?
Okay, so that's a good question. And there's ADS and others have been working on this. They've been developing a software broker that helps to manage this duplication. It's the same type of duplication that occurs with preprints and the published article. So you have an archive record in ADS for a particular article, and then the article is published in a journal, and the journal assigns a DOI to the article itself. So ADS has a way of resolving these, although both records exist in ADS. It's the same, it's kind of the same process with software, because software can have, people do write papers about their software. So there can be an article about the software that names the software in the title, that is available as a preprint, and then that article can get published. So that's two entities for it in ADS. The ASCL publishes an entry, but we don't issue a DOI for it. ADS can ingest that, and then someone may also put their code in Zenodo, and if somebody cites the Zenodo record, then that will create a record in ADS as well, using the software broker and this new method that ADS is using to try to capture software use in articles. So yes, there are different records being created. It's always clear from the bib code what the entity is, that where the record came from in ADS. So there's a bib code for a bib stem for ASCL, that's ascl.soft. If there is an article about the software in JOS, then the bib stem includes JOS. If the article is in, AppJ, etc. So you can tell from the bib code where the record came from. But another way to tell is by the doc type. So an article takes the doc type article, and an ASCL entry takes the doc type software. So you can look in ADS only for articles about software, or only for software entities in ADS as well. So there is duplication, but you can tell which is which. And ADS is trying to find a way to aggregate citations to these different things.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That explains it very nicely. I think that the question was sort of leading to another question, but it's I guess it's out of your control. But it's like, when you look on Google Scholar and it tries to calculate your H index, and
yeah.
So I have it's like, synonymously, someone could cite either the code or the JOS article or something else, and it all should kind of just link to the same semantic notion of my software project, right? Like, I don't really particularly care which of those citations they use, but I do care if I have 10 things and I have one citation spread amongst 10 different groups of buckets when they should all be in one bucket.
Right, and that's something, when we get to the ASCL demo, remind me of this, and I'll show you a couple of things between ASCL and ADS on this. But one of the things I strongly suggest, and that ASCL can help with, is that you should decide how you want your software cited and make that known to people. And there are numerous ways of citing software: the paper, the JOS, a JOS entry, a DOI on Zenodo, ASCL, etc. There's a difference between citing a specific version for a software package. You want in an article to say which version of the software you used, but you might want the citation to go to the concept of the software rather than a particular version. And there are ways to do that, both in Zenodo and with ASCL. So we can talk more about that. I can talk about software citation for a long time. So, yeah. and I'm happy to do that. But so we'll defer the rest of this to the demo, and then after the talk, if you want to talk more about it. Okay. All right. So, what software so I've talked about, why we do this and what we want, and we want to improve the transparency of science. We want people to release their software, and what research am I talking about? But I really want your software. We want to do more with Planetary Science. So last year we added an editor who is focused on Planetary Science, She came to me and said she wanted to edit for the ASCL, and that's Kathleen Gossmeyer, Katie Gossmeyer, who's at NASA Goddard as a software person working in planetary science. And that's her domain. That's what she wants to do. So we're trying to improve our reach and our coverage of planetary science. And when I say planetary science, I need to be a little bit specific. We don't take Earth-only codes unless they're used for stuff looking up. The differentiation is if you're looking down, it's not typically something that the ASCL would take. If it's research for looking up, then we would take it. Clearly, there are codes written for Earth-based phenomenon that are also useful for looking up, and those we would take. The use of a code for Earth science does not negate its suitability for the ASCL. It's just, if it's also used for looking up, then we do want it. So Katie focuses on software, on this type of software. She actually goes out and looks for software in planetary research journals, including the AGU journals and the AAS's new Planetary Science journal. She suggested that we improve the language on our homepage regarding what software we register. And she also presented the ASCL at last December's AGU meeting, you know, in the before times when we could meet in person, handed out ADS swag and all that. And we're also watching developments in projects such as Planetary Pi and some of these other things that are coming up. So I want to go to a live demo now, and we'll see how well this works. This is the homepage of the ASCL. You see that it looks very simple. We have a menu across the top. We show the 10 most recently added software packages. We have a search bar, a search field in the upper right-hand corner, and that's on every page, so it's easy to find what you're looking for. This is a simple search. We'll be releasing an API perhaps in October that will let you do more. But this does search for author, for code name, for words within the description or abstract for the code. So I'm going to pull up a code called Exo Striker, and I can do that with that. So this code was submitted to the ASCL by the author. So that's our search result. Clicking on the title of the code brings up the whole record. You see here the ASCL ID looks very similar to an archive ID, and that's for a reason. We liked the way they did stuff and it seemed to work, so we copied them. I refer to it as redistributing the wealth of the web. We have the title. We have the person who wrote the code, the person or people or entity, whoever gets credit for the code. We have a brief description of the software. We link to where the software exists. More and more codes are. We also list here 2 papers that this software package is used in. This goes back to the artifacts that I told you about for demonstrating that the code is used in research. So here are 2 papers that use this code. This code does not have a code description paper. It does not have a JOS paper. So we can link it to research though through these 2 articles. You also see that we have a bib code, and that is ASCL assigned, and ADS takes our bib code because we follow their formula for creating it. And you see it also has a preferred citation. The preferred citation, we don't care what the preferred citation is officially. We don't care. We prefer that it be a good way to cite software. There are some ways that are better than other ways. The ASCL is one way, but any way you want your software cited is what we will list here when we can find this information. We like to have it in our records as a courtesy to the authors, because we want your software cited and we want it cited the way you want it. Because as Andrew, I think it was, said, you want to aggregate your citations to one bucket, even though there may be multiple buckets. So here's one way to do that, is to list a preferred citation on your code site. We don't determine what this preferred citation is. We look at your code site to see what it is. So if you go to Exo Striker and look at their GitHub repo, they have nice graphics. Somebody's kicking Saturn there. That doesn't seem very nice. We can go down here and see, if you make use of Exo Striker, please cite us by the ASCL ID, because it's unlikely he's going to find time to write a paper. So we can click on the bib code here and go to ADS and see that this code has been cited 7 times. We also see over here associated works, and on the, do you see my cursor? Can somebody let me know?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
good.
we see your
Okay.
cursor.
Okay, good. I was assuming that and then realized maybe you don't. So in associated works, we see that we're looking at the source software work, and that is associated with 2 papers, and these links come from the ASCL. So ADS ingests our records and ingests whatever we have in the used in field or the described in field, so it can associate software with the papers that use it and vice versa. So we can look at the preferred citation method that just goes to again to that same record. So you can pull the BibTeX from there. We don't want to duplicate services where there are already good solutions for that. And then there's also a link to a discussion forum thread for this particular software package. The discussion forum isn't used very often, except by sometimes an editor, sometimes a software author will post notes on it. And that's another way, that's one way for people to let me know that something needs to be changed about the software. Also, if I apply some heavy editing to a record after I've created it, sometimes years down the road, years after it was created, if the edits are substantial, and I'm afraid somebody might be confused as to why this record looks so different, I'll post something on the discussion forum to say, this is what I changed about this particular record. So that's what an entry looks like. I want to point out browsing. You can browse the ASCL by clicking on Browse, and you see that it comes up in a particular order. This is by title, so the name of the code, and it lists abstracts, but I often like to look at it by date. You can see we have codes from 1999, so we actually had to have a century field in our database for this reason. So these are the codes that were originally in ASCL. And we can look at this, we can change the search order or the display order. So we're looking only at the most recent ones, and we can take a compact look at this. So here's one of the secrets of the ASCL. If you go to the bottom of the page, you can also select, you can also view random codes. So if you just want to kind of poke around and see what's in the ASCL, you can go click through random codes and see what's out there. And we post a random code every day on our Facebook page and on our Twitter feed, and it's generated from this. It's one way that we edit the record. So I see this record needs editing. So as I find different records through the random code search, I'm also curating the records before I put them out as a random code of the day. So you see this particular record has a citation method that is a link to a paper. So if we click on this, we'll see that there are 2 citations to that paper. This is the paper. And here again, we see associated works. And if you click on the source software, you get the ASCL entry. We're going to go back to ASCL here and look at submitting. How do you submit a code to the ASCL? You click on submissions, and we have a handy form for doing this. It's pretty easy to fill out. We have some fun graphics down here that are galaxies. So physics is fun is the bot challenge. So you can fill that out. I've also taken codes, though, that have been tweeted to me saying, here's the paper, here's the code. There's a good description already written, so use that. And I've taken them off of Twitter. So you can tweet at ASCLNet, and I'll take it that way. You can email it to me at editor@ascl.net or aallen@ascl.net. But as I said, we like it when people submit their codes because regardless of how they submit it, because we might miss it otherwise. And we do want your software. I'll point out one other thing on this page, and that's the dashboard. One question that we get a lot is, do you curate your links? You have a lot of site links. How do you know, are they good links? We do run 2 different link checkers. One runs continuously in the background, and after a code is bad for a certain amount of time, after a link is bad for a certain amount of time, or reported as bad, then we pursue that link to try to resolve the problem. We either check to see whether it really is a problem, because a lot of times it isn't. It's just a site does not, some sites don't react well to automated testing of their links and will report as bad when they're good. Other times, as happened earlier, as happened just this past week, somebody didn't realize that his Bitbucket Mercurial site had been removed because Bitbucket removed all the Mercurial repos that it had. So he didn't know the link was bad until ASCL wrote to him and said, this link is bad. And he wrote back, he goes, I don't have a copy of that code anymore. But Software Heritage and another service, Octo I think it was, had backed up his code. He tried to pull it from one of those sites and didn't see the software source code in what he said maybe somebody could dig through it and find it. And I wrote back to him and said, we actually have your software, the zip file from the Bitbucket Mercurial site, and we sent that to him, so he now has it, and he'll put it back out on GitHub. We download that we register, or almost all the codes that we... Connection is unstable, sorry. Because we want to make sure that they are downloadable. We don't serve them to the public unless somebody specifically requests that we do. So we just keep archive. And we also, particularly if it's a personal code site or an institutional code site, to the Internet Archive. A lot of times the Internet Archive already has it, but if it doesn't, we will ask. I have a button on my browser that says, send this page to the Internet Archive. So the information about the code that's on that web page is maintained as well. Although it's nice to have the source code and we want to preserve the source code, there are also artifacts that go with that source code that make it having the source code more valuable. And those are instructions, how to install it, how to use it, etc. So we like to try to capture that as well, both in ASCL and by pushing to other entities. So here, my point back to the dashboard is that we do report our link health right at the top. You see there's an asterisk there. The link checker ran at 4 this morning, and as of today, about 92% of our links were working. This is an artificially low number. Some links, as I said, do not respond well to automated link checking. And we now have so many GitHub links that we're running into some rate checking problems. So when we try to test GitHub, so we need to do some editing of our link checker here. But anyway, you know that this is the bottom threshold. So there are at least 92% of working links in our site links, and then, as I said, the number is higher. There are also some statistics, how many codes we add per year, what our citations look like, citations by journal, which journals are citing. And when I say that there are over 100 journals who have citations to ASCL, I take it from this list here. Some of them might have only one, A lot of journals have just one, but they're typically not astro journals. So you can see monthly notices has 29% of the pie. It used to have 40% of the pie, and that's because it had, it was for two reasons. Some, at the time it had a wedge of 40 citations, 40% of citations to ASCL. It had an editor who was very active in getting people to cite software, and he was suggesting the ASCL for that as one of the methods. And also there were journals at that time that did not allow software citation, so there was less competition for a pie wedge, but that has changed. So that's the dashboard. I've already shown you how to get a random code. Something else I want to point out is that we typically like to have a short name for a code. So many people do name their codes. We use the short name or the name like music to monophonic as an alias. So you can actually pull up a code by typing the alias after ASCL.net. So if I want XCAM, I can pull that up. You don't have to know the name of the code. You can put it right in the URL, and of course you can always search for it on the site. We find this handy mostly for data editors. So some of the data editors working on the journals know this trick, so they just do ASCL.net/name of the code and see if it comes up. They don't even have to already be on the ASCL to pull it up. And then the software authors themselves don't need to remember the ASCL ID. They can simply use that in the URL. We don't like to see citations or references to the alias name though, because we can't guarantee that we'll always have those. So the preferred way of writing down where the code is always to use the ASCL ID in that. And we also make our public data available in JSON, and we do that. You can pull it up. We don't have a link to this anywhere except maybe in the news area, where we do have an API under development that we hope to release next month. We've finished alpha testing. We begin beta testing shortly, but you can get all of the data in ASCL if for some reason you want it by typing /code/JSON, and that pulls up all of the records. It takes a little minute to pull all 2,000 of them, and we can look at a pretty print of this, and there are all the codes. So that's a secret too. Not a lot of people know that, but now you are among the ones who do. Is there anything else that you would like me to show you on the ASCL itself? Because I want to go back to the presentation. Going one? Go ahead.
I just had a question. I was playing with it myself, and there seems to be an implementation delay on the links on ADS. It's like the newest ones, so the bitcode links are broken.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and that's because you see, I just entered them yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So I typically push out codes at the end of the month. So it makes the last weekend of the month always very interesting for me. So because I'm trying to process them all and get them out there. But there is a delay. ADS typically picks up our entries on Fridays. They pick us up about once a week, sometimes more often, but I've noticed that that typically on Mondays is when the new codes appear. So, and that's simply, they don't pick up every day from every resource. They have schedules for different resources. And ours is they're picking us up about weekly. A Web of Science indexes us quarterly. So there's a longer delay for things to appear in Web of Science. So different indexers have different pickup times for our codes. But you're right. So these most recent codes are not in there. because they were added over the weekend and they simply haven't run their retrieval process yet.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Yeah, it's just good to know for
Yep.
expectation-wise. And the other what question I had is, just because you mentioned ADS so often and having even people being maybe at the same booth at the conference or something like that, is there any organizational relationship between ASCL and ADS?
No. ASCL is completely independent. We want to remain independent of journals, but we want to work with journals and we want to work with indexers. And of course, ADS being the indexer for this discipline, I talked to them at the very first conference I went to because I wanted them to index us. I wanted people to be able to find software. And at the time, there was no entity. There were ASCL-like entities before ASCL and even after ASCL started, but they all died. So, and that's, I wrote a whole paper on, looking back, that's available from the Journal of Open Resource Software, JORS. So I went out and looked at all these other entities and they were all either dying or dead. Most of them discontinued, although they stayed online for a while. And now most of the links to those sites don't work anymore. Fortunately, I took screenshots of them all before they disappeared, so I knew what they looked like. But so yeah, we do work closely with ADS, and when something happens here, when I've changed something that changes a bib code, for example, I write to them and say, this is changing and this is why. We had a change in the order of authors, so the bib code is going to change, and you're not crazy, and that's why you're seeing it. So one of the odd things about that is it shows up in dashboards. Sometimes the percentage of codes in ADS is higher than 100%, and it's because of these bib code changes. They still have two records. So no, we're not officially associated with them. But we all want the same thing. We want information to be available out there and all of that.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So that's that. Let me go back. Are there any other questions, things to show on this? So that's the live demo. And now I'm open for questions. And I hope that one of them is, where do you get your cool pictures? And they're all of the photos, all of the images in this presentation were processed by Judy Schmidt, who also designed the ASCL infrastructure in 28 hours and had it populated with our data. So she's pretty amazing. So this is the image that's up right now is Comet NEOWISE.
So I would have a question. You just mentioned the formerly tries of doing this that died off. So what is your funding situation, and why would you not die off in the future?
Well, sometimes, so we get some funding right now, but it's mostly an unfunded endeavor and has been since it started in 1999. It's a labor. I don't get paid to work on this. It's a labor of love, and the other editors don't get paid. People do this because they want to do it. We have an advisory committee, and nobody pays them, except sometimes I take them to lunch or dinner. We do have some funding from the Heidelberg Institute for Theoretical Physics. They do provide us with funding that helps us go to conferences. We currently have some funding from NASA for a proposal that we wrote to NASA that was funded, and that's to make NASA software more discoverable by tagging it. We had not been using keywords up until this project started 2 years ago. The project's almost over, but it will end, well, no, we have another year, but But what we've been doing is mining some of the NASA sites for NASA software, and we tag it with the keyword NASA. So if you go to ADS, you can now actually look for NASA software, and I will show you how to do that.
And I asked you what program that was funded under?
I'm sorry?
Can I ask you what program that was funded under?
ADAP. It's an ADAP funded project. So if you look for doc type software, keyword NASA. We still have a ways to go with this project, but we do already have results. So these are packages that have come from NASA sites. And we are continuing to mine the NASA sites, code.nasa.gov and software.nasa.gov, in addition to some of the other sites. A lot of NASA software isn't suitable for the ASCL because it's not research software. So we're plowing through these sites, looking for suitable software and tagging it as we find it. So we do have funding for that, and that ends shortly. The funding ends shortly for that. And we're supported by Michigan Technological University. The ASCL was started by Robert Nemiroff, who you might know as one of the editors of Astronomy Picture of the Day. He has a very fertile mind and a lot of ideas. So he started APOD, and he still works on that, but he also started the Astrophysics Source Code Library in 1999. And he did some work on it, but found that it was actually kind of difficult to do. There were other services at the time, some of them funded, some of them not, some of them very well funded. One at Space Telescope, for example, that was well funded. They took in software, they vetted the software, which we don't do. We just make sure it can be downloaded and is actually software. But we don't vet it. We don't say this is great, this needs beefing up or anything like that. We have a no judgment policy about software. So that project depended on software authors to maintain the metadata in the database, and software authors don't do that. So as the metadata became out of date, it became increasingly less useful until finally it could not get funded anymore. So funding is helpful, and we would like some, we like having some, but funding is also a double-edged sword, because as soon as the funding dries up, typically the project dies. So, and we've seen that over and over. There's a link. I will show you where to find this paper where I talk about it. If you go to resources, we have, actually, let me see, yeah. We have a lot of papers here, and this is maybe not the best place to look for it.
But that's a nice resource. I think that can be quite helpful to argue for, work more on software.
Yeah, and actually, I think it's not even there. I think it is Papers and Press. So we did a study a couple of years ago on source code availability and link persistence in astrophysics. So that was a couple of years ago. But this looking before leaping, creating a software registry, a 2015 paper was published where I talk about what I did early on in working on this project, looking at these other resources and talking with some of the people who worked on them to find out why they didn't work. Why did this fail? What happened? When a new registry would be announced at ADAS, for example, which is the Astronomy Software and Data Conference, the yearly conference that happens all over the world, somebody would mention, oh, we have this new resource, we want software, etc. So there'd be a flurry of interest right after the conference, and there wasn't a consistent effort to get people coming and all of that. So a lot of my career has been spent in IT is getting people to do something different from what they're doing. So change management, you have a population that does this and you want them to do that. And how do you move them from the this to the that? And that is, I think, why the ASCL works, is because this is a different expertise than is usually found maybe in this community. So I was able to apply these change management techniques to try to move astronomy from not sharing code to moving it, to sharing it, to getting citations for it, and all of that. And that was something that these other projects didn't have, is somebody to supply that constant effort. And for me, I was working full-time when I took on this project. I was working full-time and going to grad school when I started working on this project. But I found it so interesting, and it fits so well into what I really enjoy. I love astronomy, and I really like software, and kind of a good fit for me, that I just kind of took it over from Nemiroff with his blessing. He's still involved. He's still on the advisory committee, and we talk and email actually all the time. But so he's still very involved. But I'm the one doing the work, and he will defer to me because I know much more about the ASCL than he does now. So funding, as I said, can be a double-edged sword. We have been more stable because we have not depended on funding. The other funded projects, such as AstroForge, which was based on SourceForge, but was for astronomy software, was a funded project for 3 years. The funding dried up. There were a couple of AstroSoft projects that were created that had funding, one for 5 years. Funding for 3 years is not enough to get adoption of something like this in the community. It takes something longer than that. 5 years, yes, maybe. But so we don't have a lot of funding, but we have a lot of really impassioned volunteers. And that seems to work for this. We need a little bit of funding to help us with expenses for conferences, but we don't need a lot of funding to continue. So we have in-kind support from Michigan Tech and also from the University of Maryland. I'm on the faculty at the University of Maryland because of this project, and they provide an editorial office and space for me to work, and library services and all of that. So did that answer that?
Yeah, sure. And one of our planetary funding protocols or funding pots, the PDART, the managers, they realized this as well, and they're starting to ask the question: how can we fund software in a sustainable way? Because they realized that the 3-year thing is a problem. And
yes,
it's often not stable afterwards. So
right. Yeah. So yeah, that's certainly true. And any time you want to change the way people work, unless you have the cudgel, some people have a sword that says you do this or you get fired. Unless you have something like that, it generally takes time. You've got to find the early adopters, you have to nurture them, you have to have the people who will proselytize and convince others.
It's 15 hours.
You have to build up some momentum, and then get the people who are kicking and screaming to either gradually come on board, or, as they say in physics, all you have to do is wait for somebody to die, right? Before the paradigm changes. But we have seen a shift since I've started working on the ASCL. And it's not just because of the ASCL. The problems that face astronomy and planetary science are being faced in every discipline. So there's this whole, so I talk to people who do what I do in other disciplines. And we're as people who manage software libraries, we're trying to get people to be more mindful about how they treat their software and let them know they can get citations for it. And you want to have a way to cite software. So let me show you this, one of the things that we're doing. I'm just going to pick on this. No, I'm not going to pick on that one because it's a new code. So let me go here. So here's a code. If we go up here, so there are two types of files that are becoming more and more popular to put on your GitHub repo or on your code download site for letting people know what the metadata is for your software, for citing it or for using it in some other way. So one of the ways is citation, the citation, yeah, I can type, .cff. And we will actually create a citation.cff file from the ASCL entry. And this is intended as a starting point. We want people to take these, and when I send emails out to people saying, I've registered your code, or thank you for submitting it, your ASCL ID is this, I send them a CFF file, and I also send them the other type, which is a code meta file, along with links describing what these are. So this is JSON. So this is the metadata in JSON. And you can put one or both of these files on your repo to tell people how your code should be cited and just general information. The code meta one is more flexible because you can list the preferred citation in this, but also have other information, other identifiers and all that. So we've been working with other entities to try to increase the uptake of these types of files. So citation.cff and codemeta.json. And I won't pick which one is best for you. I'll tell you the pros and cons of each, and you pick your own. But having one of them is better than having none of them. So people in other disciplines, remote sensing and biology and math and all that. So we're talking about this to try to inspire change in multiple disciplines at one time.